A native girl asked for shelter for one night, but changed the cowboy's life forever. The sun had long disappeared behind the jagged hills, leaving the wide prairie wrapped in shades of gray and gold from the last light of evening. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and the distant sound of a creek trickling over smooth stones. The cowboy rode slowly, his horse tired from the day's-long journey, the leather saddle creaking under his weight. He had been traveling alone for weeks, moving from one ranch to another, taking odd jobs to earn his living. Life on the plains was hard, and he had long grown used to solitude. For him, the endless fields, the sparse trees, and the distant mountains were comforting because they asked nothing of him. They did not demand friendship, loyalty, or love. Things he had learned over time were painful to give. He had stopped for the night at a small clearing near a ridge. The place was not much, just a wooden cabin that had been abandoned for some years. Its roof sagged in the middle, and the boards were weathered gray, with gaps that let the chill wind sneak inside. Yet it was shelter, and tonight, shelter was all he needed. As he tied his horse to a tree and adjusted the worn blanket over his saddle, he noticed the first drops of rain begin to fall, light at first, almost polite, then steadily growing into a soft drizzle. The cowboy sighed, knowing the storm would get worse as night fell. He hurried inside the cabin, shaking off the dampness and lighting the small fireplace he had discovered in the corner. The fire hissed as the kindling caught flame, filling the room with warmth and a faint smell of smoke. He sat by the fire, rubbing his hands together, and let himself relax for the first time in days. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, and the rain tapped steadily against the roof. But inside, for a moment, he felt safe. He had just begun to enjoy the quiet when a faint sound reached his ears. At first he thought it was the wind, or perhaps the branches scratching against the cabin's walls. But then it came again, a soft knock, repeated, hesitant, almost timid. He paused, his hand hovering over the handle of his old rifle, an instinct born from years of living alone in unpredictable lands. Another knock followed, this time louder, more insistent. The cowboy stood slowly, squinting through the shadows outside the cabin window. The darkness was thick, but in the dim light of the storm he could make out the shape of a figure, small and slight, standing in the rain. A girl, no older than 16 or 17, with long dark hair plastered to her shoulders by the rain. She was soaked, her clothes clinging to her thin frame, and yet she stood there, staring at the cabin with a calm, almost fearless expression. For a moment, the cowboy felt a strange hesitation. It was unusual for anyone to wander alone at this hour, especially a young girl, in the middle of a storm. His instincts told him to be cautious. He considered ignoring her, telling her there was no one here, no one to help her. But then he noticed the way she shifted her weight from one foot to another, her hands pressed together as if holding back the cold. There was something in her eyes, something that spoke of determination and hope. He felt a tug at a part of him that he had long thought dead, a part that remembered kindness, responsibility, and the unspoken understanding that people sometimes needed help, even from strangers. He opened the door slowly. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low, careful, not wanting to scare her away. The girl looked up at him, and for a moment the rain seemed to pause, as if the world itself were holding its breath. "Please," she said softly, her voice barely above the sound of the rain. "Just for tonight. I need shelter. That's all." There was no hint of arrogance, no demand, only a quiet plea that carried an honesty he could not ignore. The cowboy studied her for a long moment. He could see the dirt on her hands, the tired lines on her face, and the subtle signs of a long journey. She was clearly not from the nearby town. She had traveled far, and the storm had not been kind. After a pause, he stepped aside and motioned her in. "Come in," he said. "You can stay for the night."
"That's all I can offer." She nodded, stepping inside carefully.
Water dripped from her hair and clothes onto the wooden floor, and he quickly handed her an old towel to dry herself. The fire crackled, and she sat near it, rubbing her hands together. He watched her quietly as he prepared some simple food, a few biscuits and a slab of cheese he had been saving. She accepted it with a shy nod, and as she ate, she glanced around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the worn bedroll in the corner, and the small stove that filled the room with warmth. The cowboy noticed her curiosity but said nothing. He was not used to company, especially not from someone who seemed so different from himself. And yet, there was something comforting in her presence, something that made the cabin feel less empty, less like a place abandoned by the world. As the storm raged on outside, they sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The cowboy watched her closely, noticing the careful way she ate, the gentle way she touched the firewood to warm her hands, and the small, deliberate movements that suggested she had learned to survive in harsh conditions. He felt an unfamiliar sense of respect for her, mixed with curiosity. "Where are you from?" he finally asked, keeping his voice soft, not wanting to push her. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and for a moment he could see a lifetime of experiences hidden behind them. "I'm from a village far from here," she replied simply. "I was traveling to visit someone, but the storm came and I had nowhere to go." "I hope it's all right that I came here." There was no accusation in her tone, no expectation, only honesty. He nodded. "It's all right," he said. "You did the right thing coming here. Not everyone would have made it through this storm alone." She smiled faintly, a small gesture that lit up her face despite the weariness. "Thank you," she whispered, and in that simple word, he felt something stir within him, a sense of connection, rare and unfamiliar, that made the night seem warmer than the fire itself. Hours passed. The rain continued, relentless, drumming against the roof and windows. The cowboy sat by the fire, keeping an eye on her as she settled onto the bedroll in the corner. She looked peaceful now, her breathing slow and steady, but he knew the storm outside mirrored the journey she had taken to reach this place. Her courage had brought her here, and he could not help but admire it. In her quiet presence, he felt a sense of reflection wash over him. He thought about his own life, about the endless days he had spent riding alone, the nights by the fire, the stories left untold, and experiences left unshared. This girl who had appeared unexpectedly in the storm had brought with her a reminder of something he had long forgotten: the importance of human connection, even in the harshest of places. As the night deepened, the storm softened, leaving a gentle patter of rain on the roof. The girl slept, and the cowboy stared into the fire, thinking of the world beyond the cabin, of the lives intersecting with his own, and of the strange twist of fate that had brought her to his door. One night, just one night, he thought, and yet he already sensed it might change more than just her path. It might change his, too. Outside, the prairie lay quiet, the hills dark against the faint glow of the stars breaking through the clouds. Inside, the fire burned steadily, and for the first time in a long while, the cowboy felt a sense of calm, of anticipation, of something new beginning. In the heart of a storm, a young girl had arrived, asking only for shelter, and in doing so, she had brought a warmth that would linger long after the fire burned out. The morning came slowly, with the first soft light of dawn filtering through the gaps in the cabin's wooden walls. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and the smell of wet earth drifting through the small room. The cowboy had already risen, quietly stoking the fire so it would be warm when the girl woke. He watched her sleep for a moment, noticing how peaceful she looked, despite the long journey and the rain-soaked night. Her dark hair framed her face like a curtain, and her small hands rested gently on the blanket. He realized almost unexpectedly how much he had grown used to her presence in such a short time. There was a calmness she brought to the cabin, a quiet sense of life that had been missing from his lonely days. Eventually she stirred, blinking at the firelight and stretching her arms. She noticed him watching and offered a shy smile. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice carrying the faint music of her native tongue. He nodded, returning the greeting with a simple, "Morning. You slept well?" She nodded. "Better than I expected. Thank you again for letting me stay." He waved his hand, brushing off the thanks.
It was nothing.
A roof and fire, that's all. But even as he said the words, he knew it had meant more than nothing. For her, this shelter had been a lifeline. For him, it was the beginning of something unfamiliar. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The cowboy had only a few things to offer: some dried meat, biscuits, and the last of the coffee he had brought in a tin. She accepted it politely, eating slowly, savoring each bite, as if she were trying to store strength for whatever lay ahead. He watched her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She did not speak much at first, instead focusing on her food and glancing occasionally at the rain-softened landscape beyond the cabin. When she finally spoke, it was with a quiet honesty that caught him off guard. "I travel alone often," she said. "It is not always easy, but it teaches you to see the world differently." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight, as if each one had been learned through hardship and observation. The cowboy nodded slowly, understanding more than she knew. He had traveled alone for most of his life, but the loneliness he felt was heavier, emptier than hers. There was a difference between choosing solitude and being forced into it by circumstance. After breakfast, the girl stepped outside to gather some water from the small creek nearby. The cowboy followed at a distance, watching her move with a grace and confidence that came from living close to the land. She filled a small clay container and returned to the cabin without a word, as if the act itself was enough. Once inside, she placed the water near the fire and looked around the cabin with quiet interest. "Your cabin is small," she said, her voice gentle, "but it is safe. That is what matters." He shrugged. "It's old. Not much to it. Just a place to rest." She nodded knowingly. Sometimes that is all one needs. A place to rest, to be warm, to feel safe.
That is worth more than gold in many ways.
Her words struck him, and he found himself reflecting on his own life. The long days on the trail, the nights alone, the endless horizon that promised freedom but often delivered only emptiness. She had a way of saying simple things that made him think deeper than he usually allowed himself to. As the morning passed, they began to talk more. She told him about her village, far from the plains, nestled between forests and rivers. She spoke of her family, of the traditions that guided them, and the struggles they faced when outsiders failed to understand their ways. The cowboy listened silently at first, unsure how to respond. He had heard stories before, but these were not tales from a book or warnings from the townfolk. They were personal, filled with the emotion of lived experience. He began to see the world from her eyes, the challenges, the resilience, the beauty, and the pain. He realized that the girl had faced hardships that he could not imagine, yet she carried herself with dignity, hope, and quiet strength. At some point, the conversation turned toward him. She asked about his life, his travels, and the work he did as a cowboy. He hesitated, not used to sharing much with anyone. but there was something in her demeanor, a sense of trust and curiosity, that made him willing to speak. He told her about his routine, herding cattle, mending fences, riding long distances, and the solitary nights under the stars. He spoke honestly, without embellishment, and found that she listened without judgment, simply absorbing each word. Her presence made him feel as if his life, which he often thought was insignificant, had value because someone cared to listen. Hours passed like this, the two of them sharing stories, exchanging perspectives, and learning about each other. The cowboy found himself laughing at small things she said, her observations often sharp and unexpectedly wise. She, in turn, seemed to appreciate his humor, even in its rough, simple form. By midday, the storm had passed completely, and sunlight poured into the cabin, casting warm golden streaks across the worn wooden floor. The cowboy realized that he had not noticed the passing of time. Her company had made hours feel like minutes. He also realized that her presence had begun to change something in him, a softness, an awareness, a willingness to consider others that he had not felt in years. Later, the girl offered to help with small chores around the cabin, stacking firewood, sweeping the floor, and organizing supplies. She moved with quiet efficiency, and the cowboy watched her, impressed by her competence and determination. "You make this place look better than it has in years," he said with a small smile. She laughed softly, a sound that blended with the gentle creak of the cabin and the distant calls of birds outside. "It is good to help," she replied. "Even small acts make a difference. A clean place, a warm fire, a shared meal, these are important." The cowboy nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. He had lived so long thinking survival was only about strength, skill, and endurance, but she reminded him that kindness, care, and thoughtfulness mattered just as much. As the afternoon sun warmed the cabin, they spoke of dreams and hopes, things neither had shared with many others. The girl told him she hoped to one day help her village thrive, to teach younger children, and to preserve the traditions that were slipping away. The cowboy, in turn, admitted that he sometimes wished for companionship, a sense of belonging, and a life not defined solely by work and isolation. They found common ground in their desire for a better future, even though their paths had been so different. In that small, sunlit cabin, two worlds met, one shaped by rugged survival, the other by resilience and community, and each began to influence the other. The more the cowboy noticed small details that had escaped him before, the quiet strength in her posture, the way her eyes seemed to observe everything without judgment, and the calm determination she carried, even after a long, exhausting journey. She was not just a visitor in his life. She was a mirror reflecting possibilities he had never considered. He began to wonder how someone so young could carry so much wisdom, and he felt a mix of admiration and humility. Her presence was not only a comfort, but also a challenge, a gentle push to reconsider the way he had lived, the choices he had made, and the walls he had built around his heart. By late afternoon, the girl sat near the window, looking out at the open plains bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. The cowboy joined her, and together they watched the horizon, silent for a while, each lost in thought. The world outside seemed endless, full of opportunities and unknowns, and yet they felt a connection that made the vastness less intimidating. "Do you think people can change?" she asked quietly, her voice almost blending with the breeze. He thought about his own life and the unexpected arrival of this girl. "I think they can," he said finally. "Sometimes it just takes someone to show them a different way." She smiled faintly, as if understanding more than the words expressed. The evening approached, and with it came the quiet sounds of night. Crickets, distant calls of owls, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. The girl prepared a small meal, and the cowboy helped where he could, though he realized that her skill and knowledge made the work almost effortless. They ate together, sharing the simple food with a sense of camaraderie that neither had expected. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, small stories and laughter, and the cowboy found himself feeling lighter, freer, as if a weight he had carried for years had begun to lift. The girl had brought more than shelter. She had brought connection, perspective, and a subtle reminder of what it meant to care. As night fell, the cowboy and the girl sat near the fire, the warmth from the flames matching the warmth that had grown between them. He realized that this one night, this one unexpected encounter, was beginning to leave a mark on him. He felt a quiet excitement, a curiosity about the future, and a newfound appreciation for the unexpected ways life could teach lessons. The girl, too, seemed content, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and a sense of calm satisfaction. Both knew that tomorrow might bring challenges, that their paths might diverge once the sun rose. But for now, in this quiet cabin on the plains, something meaningful had begun to take root. The morning after the storm broke quietly over the prairie, sunlight spilled across the rolling hills, reflecting off dew-covered grass and glinting on the edges of the distant creek. The cowboy was awake before the girl, sitting outside his cabin with a small cup of coffee, staring at the horizon. The events of the previous night lingered in his mind. He had offered shelter to a stranger, and yet it felt like more than that. It was as if her presence had opened a door he hadn't realized he had closed. He wondered about her journey, about the life she led beyond these plains, and about the quiet strength she carried so naturally. He had always thought of himself as a solitary man, capable of handling anything alone, but her arrival had unsettled him in a way he could not ignore. When the girl emerged from the cabin, her hair still damp but brushed neatly, she greeted him with a small smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "The storm has passed?" He nodded. "Yes. It seems the sun wanted to make up for last night." There was a pause as they watched the morning unfold, the prairie alive with light, sound, and movement. Birds flitted through the air, the breeze carried a fresh, earthy scent, and the distant hills seemed to glow in gold. It was a moment of quiet beauty, and for the first time in a long while the cowboy felt fully present, noticing things he had ignored for years. The way the grass swayed with the wind, the gentle hum of insects, the distant ripple of water in the creek. The girl noticed it too, and for a moment they shared a silence that spoke volumes. After breakfast, they decided to venture a little outside the cabin. The girl wanted to show him some of the nearby terrain, the small paths she had noticed on her way, and the creek where she had fetched water. As they walked, she moved with a careful but confident step, pointing out the subtle signs of wildlife, the tracks of deer, the burrows of rabbits, and the subtle impressions left by birds in the soft earth. The cowboy followed, impressed by her knowledge. He had spent years on the plains, and yet she noticed details he had missed countless times. "You see things differently," he said. "Most people don't notice half of what you just showed me." She shrugged, smiling faintly. "I learned early to observe. The land teaches you if you pay attention. You learn quickly if you need to survive." There was no pride in her voice, only a quiet truth that resonated deeply with him. As they walked further, the girl began to speak of her village again, not in the distant, almost abstract way she had the day before, but with more depth. She told him about the people, the elders, and the children. She spoke of the songs they sang, the stories they told, and the lessons passed down through generations. "Our village is small," she said, "but strong. We help each other. We watch for those who struggle and offer what we can. It is not always easy, but it is our way." The cowboy listened intently, sensing that there was wisdom in her words, a kind of clarity he had never known. He had lived his life mostly for himself, moving from one task to another, rarely thinking beyond his immediate needs. Her stories made him question his choices, his detachment, and the years he had spent closing himself off from others. By midday, the sun had climbed higher, warming the prairie and casting shadows across the landscape. They returned to the cabin, tired from walking, but invigorated by the fresh air and the small discoveries along the way. Inside, the girl suggested that they repair some of the old gaps in the cabin walls where the wind had slipped through. The cowboy initially resisted, thinking it unnecessary, but she insisted. "Even small things matter," she said. "A stronger cabin protects you better. You notice the details that keep life safe. This applies to the land, to people, and to yourself." Her words lingered with him as they worked together, nailing loose boards and reinforcing weak spots. For the first time in years, he realized the pleasure of teamwork, of working alongside someone with purpose and intention, even if it was only for a few simple tasks. As they finished, the girl paused and looked around. "It's better now," she said, satisfaction in her voice. The cowboy agreed, noting how small efforts could make a meaningful difference. He also noticed something else, a subtle shift in himself. He was beginning to care, not just for the immediate tasks, but for the people, places, and experiences that had long seemed distant or irrelevant. Her influence was quiet but steady, like water shaping stone over time. He did not yet fully understand it, but he knew it was happening. The afternoon brought a quiet rest. The girl sat by the fire with a small book of drawings she had carried, sketching the prairie, the hills, and even the cabin. The cowboy watched her work, fascinated by her focus and the skill of her hand. "You draw well," he said, trying to find the right words. She looked up, smiling gently. "I like to remember what I see," she said. "Places, moments, people, all are worth remembering. Even small things matter. They tell stories if you pay attention." Her words made him reflect on his own life. He had traveled far, seen many places, but he rarely paused to notice or remember. Perhaps he had been too busy surviving to truly live. Her perspective, simple yet profound, encouraged him to look differently at the world around him. Later, the conversation turned to family, an area the cowboy had not expected to discuss. The girl spoke openly about hers, describing a close-knit group that faced challenges together, yet celebrated the small joys of life. She spoke with warmth, pride, and sometimes sadness, revealing the depth of her attachment and loyalty. The cowboy listened, sensing a mix of envy and admiration. He had lost touch with family long ago, his bonds frayed or broken by time and circumstance. Listening to her, he realized how much he had missed: the laughter, the arguments, the comfort of knowing someone cared deeply for you. Her stories made him question whether he had unintentionally closed himself off to what truly mattered. As evening approached, the girl suggested they prepare a simple meal together. She moved with ease, gathering herbs, chopping vegetables, and tending the fire, while he assisted where he could. Their cooperation was natural, comfortable, and filled with quiet laughter and light conversation. She shared small details of her life: how she had learned to cook with limited ingredients, how she managed tasks efficiently, and how patience often produced better results than force or haste. The cowboy absorbed these lessons, realizing that life was richer when shared, and that guidance often came from unexpected sources. After the meal, they sat by the window, watching the sky turn shades of orange, pink, and purple as the sun set. The prairie glowed in the fading light, and the distant hills seemed almost magical. "Do you ever wish things were different?" the girl asked quietly, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. He thought of the years he had spent traveling alone, of the lonely nights and endless horizons, and of the choices that had shaped his solitary life. Sometimes, he admitted, but I think we make the best of what we have. She nodded, understanding more than he had said. Sometimes, the world teaches you lessons slowly, through people, through experiences. Even one person can change the path of another if they notice. Her words lingered in his mind, making him wonder just how much his path had already been altered by her presence. Night fell, bringing a blanket of stars across the prairie sky. The air was cool, carrying the scent of grass and distant earth. The cowboy and the girl sat in silence by the fire, reflecting on the day. The cabin felt warmer now, not just from the flames, but from the sense of shared experience and growing trust. The cowboy realized that this single day had already taught him more than many months of solitary travel. He had seen the world through another perspective, learned the value of observation and care, and felt the quiet power of human connection. The girl, too, seemed content, her calm demeanor unchanged, yet subtly influencing the atmosphere of the cabin and the man who had opened his door to her. As they prepared for bed, the cowboy noticed the small ways she had left traces of her presence: tidied corners, neatly arranged supplies, and even a small sketch of the cabin tucked into the firewood pile. He felt a quiet admiration for her thoughtfulness and the strength she carried without complaint. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel gratitude, not just for her presence, but for the lessons she had brought, the perspective she offered, and the subtle reminder that life was bigger than survival, bigger than the endless horizon, and richer than he had dared to imagine. The next morning the prairie was calm, bathed in the gentle light of dawn. Mist hovered above the grass, giving the land a soft, almost magical glow. The cowboy had woken early, as was his habit, but this time he was not restless. He found himself thinking about the girl, about the quiet wisdom she carried, and about how much the night and the days together had already shifted something deep inside him. He had always lived a life of solitude, moving from one place to another, relying only on himself. Yet now he sensed that change was possible. Perhaps it had been there all along, waiting for a reason, waiting for someone to arrive who could awaken it. The girl, of course, was awake as well. She had already begun gathering water from the creek, humming softly as she worked. The cowboy watched her, a faint smile on his face. She moved with a sense of purpose and calm, and even in the early light she seemed full of quiet energy. "Good morning," he called softly. She turned, smiling. "Good morning." "The day is peaceful today," she said. It was a small remark, but the way she spoke carried the weight of appreciation for the simple beauty around them. The cowboy realized he had almost forgotten to notice mornings like this, so absorbed had he been in travel, work, and survival. After breakfast, the girl suggested they explore a path she had noticed on her way the day before, a winding trail through a small grove of trees at the edge of the prairie. The cowboy hesitated for a moment. He had intended to continue on his travels soon, but something in her eyes convinced him to join her. "Lead the way," he said, and together they walked toward the grove. The sun was warm on their backs, the birds sang from the branches, and the air smelled of damp earth and fresh leaves. As they moved, the girl spoke of her travels, the places she had seen, and the people she had met. She did not boast, nor did she complain. Her words were simple, honest, and filled with a quiet understanding of life's difficulties and joys. As they reached the grove, the cowboy noticed a small deer trapped in the branches of a fallen tree, struggling to free itself. Its legs were caught, and it looked exhausted. The girl knelt down, speaking softly to the animal, and the cowboy instinctively approached to help. Together they carefully freed the deer, gently supporting it as it stumbled to its feet. The animal hesitated for a moment, looking at them, then bounded away into the safety of the trees. The cowboy watched it disappear, a strange sense of satisfaction filling him. "You always seem to know what to do," he said quietly. The girl shrugged, smiling faintly. "Sometimes you just have to pay attention. The land and its creatures will guide you if you listen. Strength alone is not enough." Her words resonated deeply with him. He had lived by strength, skill, and endurance, but he had often overlooked the quiet lessons of patience, observation, and care. They continued along the trail and eventually reached a small clearing with a view of the surrounding hills. The grass here was tall and green, and a small stream trickled through the center, reflecting the sunlight. The cowboy felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. He had wandered countless miles across the plains, yet he had never paused to truly appreciate a place like this. The girl sat down near the stream, motioning for him to join her. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the water and the wind, letting the beauty of the moment settle into their minds. Then she spoke again, softly but firmly. "You have lived many years alone," she said. "You are strong, capable, and independent, but you have also built walls around yourself. Walls that keep others away, walls that keep you from seeing the world fully. I do not know your past, but I see the way you guard yourself. You do not have to do it forever. Change is possible if you choose it." The cowboy was silent, absorbing her words. They were not a judgment nor a lecture, but a quiet reflection of something he had known but refused to admit. He thought of his life, the long days of work, the lonely nights by the fire, the endless horizon that offered freedom but little connection. Her words cut through the layers he had built over the years, revealing the part of him that longed for something more. He looked at her, noticing how calm, honest, and unafraid she seemed. "It is not easy," he admitted. "I have been this way for so long, I do not know if I can change." She nodded, understanding. Change is never easy. But every choice you make can move you closer or farther away. You have already taken steps, simply by letting me stay and listening. You have shown openness. That is the beginning. Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that filled the cowboy with a mix of hope and fear. Hope because he realized that he could still shape his life differently. Fear because it meant letting go of habits and patterns he had relied on for years. As the day passed, the girl shared stories of her culture, her people, and the lessons she had learned from elders and ancestors. She spoke of respect for the land, for creatures, and for human connections. The cowboy listened, absorbing each word. He realized that her life had been shaped by challenges he had never faced, and yet she carried herself with patience, wisdom, and quiet strength. Her presence was a mirror, reflecting not only what he had lost by living alone, but also what he could gain by opening his heart. By late afternoon, the cowboy suggested they return to the cabin. On the way back, he noticed how the girl moved with care and awareness, noticing every detail of the land. "You see the world differently," he said. "You notice what I overlook." She smiled. "That is because I must. I cannot survive otherwise. But you will see too, if you let yourself. You have the ability to notice, to care, to act. You have not lost that, even if you have forgotten." Her words stayed with him, echoing as they walked back along the familiar path, past the creek, and toward the cabin he had once thought of as only a temporary shelter. When they returned, the girl suggested that they clean and organize the supplies, tending to small repairs that had gone undone. The cowboy helped, though he realized how much he had relied on doing things alone. In his own way, her guidance was gentle, patient, and precise. Through small actions, stacking firewood, Arranging tools and tidying the cabin, he began to see how even simple acts of care could bring order, comfort, and connection. By evening, the cabin felt warmer, not just from the fire, but from the energy and harmony that her presence had created. As night fell, the girl suggested they sit by the fire and talk. The cowboy hesitated, uncertain what he could offer in conversation, but she simply smiled and began speaking. She told him about the future she hoped to build, about helping her village, teaching children, and preserving traditions that she feared would be lost. Her eyes shone with determination and hope, and the cowboy felt a stirring in his chest he had not felt in years. He realized he wanted to be part of something larger than himself, to contribute, to connect, to live with intention rather than mere survival. Suddenly, a loud noise from outside startled them. A distant cry, followed by the rustle of movement through the trees. The cowboy instinctively grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. In the dim light of the moon, he saw a group of men approaching the cabin, their intentions unclear. His heart raced, but he remained calm, remembering the lessons of observation and patience the girl had shown him. "Stay inside," he whispered. "Do not come out." She nodded, watching him, her trust in him evident even in the tense moment. The men came closer, shouting and demanding food and supplies. The cowboy stepped forward, hand steady, and spoke with authority. "This is my cabin. You will not take what is not yours." For a moment tension hung in the air, thick and heavy. But the girl, observing quietly, suggested a simple, clever solution, offering the men enough supplies to satisfy their needs without giving up everything. Her quick thinking and calm demeanor guided him, and together they diffused the situation. The men left, grumbling but without violence, and the cowboy realized the depth of her influence. Her wisdom, courage, and quick thinking had not only protected the cabin, but also shaped his response in a way he would not have managed alone. After the incident, the cowboy sat by the fire reflecting. He understood now that the girl had not only shared her knowledge, perspective, and presence, but had also taught him courage, patience, and the importance of seeing beyond himself. She had changed the way he viewed the world and his place in it. The storm, the journey, and the unexpected encounter had culminated in this pivotal moment. He could not go back to being the man he had been. Something inside him had shifted, quietly but irrevocably. As the night deepened and the prairie lay bathed in moonlight, the cowboy felt a sense of clarity he had never known. The girl, sitting nearby, worked quietly, humming softly. He realized that she had arrived at his door seeking only shelter, yet she had given him something far greater: perspective, courage, and a chance to change. For the first time in his life, he understood that one person's presence, one act of kindness, could alter the course of another's life forever. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he would never be the same. The next morning, the prairie awoke with a gentle calm. The sun rose slowly, casting golden light over the rolling hills and dew-kissed grass. The cowboy sat outside his cabin, sipping the last of his coffee, thinking about the girl. She had been quiet for a while, gathering water and organizing her few belongings, but there was a calm determination in her actions that reminded him of everything he had learned from her. The events of the past days, the storm, the deer in the grove, the unexpected confrontation, had already changed him. He felt it deep in his chest, in the slow, steady beat of his heart. He was no longer the same man who had lived alone, indifferent to the world around him. The girl approached him, holding a small bundle of belongings wrapped carefully in cloth. She smiled softly. "I will be leaving soon," she said. Her voice was calm but carried a hint of sadness. The journey must continue. The cowboy nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and regret. "I understand," he said. But
I want to thank you for everything.
she shook her head gently. No thanks are necessary. I only asked for a place to rest, and you gave it. But in doing so, we both learned something. That is enough. Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. She had not only sought shelter, but had offered lessons, perspective, and a spark that would guide him long after she left. Before she departed, she handed him a small token carefully wrapped in soft cloth. Keep this, she said, to remember that even one night, one act of kindness can change a life. Not just yours, but others as well. Carry it with care. The cowboy accepted the gift with reverence, unwrapping it slowly to reveal a small carved figure of a bird, simple yet beautiful. It seemed to capture the essence of freedom, hope, and resilience all at once. He felt a lump in his throat, realizing that this tiny object represented more than her artistry. It symbolized the transformation she had brought into his life. They walked to the edge of the cabin together, where the trail led back toward the prairie paths. She looked back once, her dark hair catching the sunlight, her eyes reflecting gratitude and a quiet pride. Farewell, she said. Remember what we shared. Let it guide your choices, your actions, and your heart. The cowboy nodded, swallowing hard.
I will, he said.
I will never forget you, or what you've taught me. Then, with a final smile, she turned and walked down the path, disappearing into the hills beyond the horizon. After she left, the cowboy remained at the cabin, staring at the trail she had taken. For a long time he simply sat, reflecting on the days they had shared. He thought about her courage, her wisdom, and the gentle ways she had guided him to see the world differently. He realized that her visit had not been a simple encounter. It had been a turning point. The quiet strength she carried had awakened something dormant inside him, a sense of purpose and connection that he had long thought lost. He began to understand that life was not only about survival, skill, or independence. It was about care, observation, and shared experience. In the days that followed, the cowboy began to act differently. He tended to the cabin with renewed attention, organizing his supplies, repairing broken boards, and improving the small garden he had once neglected. Each action, though simple, carried meaning now. He thought of the girl's lessons, the importance of small efforts, the value of patience, and the significance of observing the world carefully. He realized that these were not just practical skills, but lessons for life, guiding him to live more consciously, more thoughtfully, and more compassionately. Word of his presence at the cabin and his small acts of kindness spread quietly through the nearby villages. He helped travelers who passed through the area, sharing food, offering guidance, and assisting with repairs. He became known not just as a skilled cowboy, but as a man of quiet wisdom, approachable yet strong, independent yet caring. He would never admit it openly, but he knew that the transformation within him began with the girl who had come to his door seeking shelter. She had shown him that even small actions could ripple outward, changing not just one life, but many. The seasons shifted, as they always do, bringing warmth, cold, and the cycles of nature. The cowboy often thought of her, wondering where her travels had taken her, and how her life continued. He imagined her teaching children, preserving traditions, and living with the same calm strength he had witnessed. Occasionally, he would hear stories of a young girl helping communities along the prairie paths, and he would smile quietly, realizing that the world was smaller, kinder, and more connected than he had once believed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the cowboy held the small carved bird in his hands. He traced its smooth edges and felt the connection it represented. He reflected on how a single night, a single act of offering shelter, had reshaped the course of his life. He thought of the deer they had saved, the storm they had weathered, and the moments of shared laughter and conversation. Each memory reminded him that life was enriched not by wealth, possessions, or distance traveled alone, but by the connections forged, the lessons learned, and the courage to act with compassion. As he placed the carved bird on the small shelf above the fireplace, he felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known. The cabin, once a simple shelter, had become a home, not just a place of survival, but a space where he could grow, reflect, and connect. He realized that change was not sudden but gradual, built through moments of awareness, choices guided by empathy, and the influence of those who enter our lives unexpectedly. The girl had come as a stranger, seeking only shelter, but she had given him much more, a vision of life that included care, community, and hope. In the quiet nights that followed, the cowboy often sat by the fire, thinking about the girl and the lessons she had brought. He would recall the simple conversations, the walks along the prairie, the way she had noticed details he had overlooked, and the moments when her wisdom had guided him in unexpected ways. He realized that her visit was not a one-time event, but a catalyst for continual growth. He began to notice other people more, helping neighbors, guiding travelers, and even taking small steps to connect with distant family members he had long ignored. Over time, the cowboy's reputation transformed. Travelers spoke of the man who had once been solitary and distant, but now showed patience, kindness, and quiet understanding. People sought his guidance, trusted his judgment, and valued his friendship. And while he did not boast, he knew that the change within him was lasting. It had been sparked by a girl who had asked for nothing more than a roof over her head for one night, yet in doing so, she had ignited a transformation that would continue for years to come. Years later, the cowboy would often recount the story to those who asked. He would tell them of the night the storm raged and a young girl appeared at his door. He would speak of her courage, her wisdom, and the simple yet profound lessons she had shared. He would speak of the deer they had saved, the cabin they had repaired, and the quiet moments of reflection and laughter. And through these stories he would remind others of the power of kindness, of paying attention to the world, and of the truth that even one encounter, one act of generosity can change a life forever. The carved bird remained on the shelf, a constant reminder of the girl who had walked into his life and left an indelible mark. Each morning, as sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, he would glance at it and remember her words. That small acts of care, observation, and connection have the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And in that quiet reflection, the cowboy knew he had been given a gift far greater than shelter, food, or company. He had been given the opportunity to change, to open his heart, and to live a life richer, fuller, and more meaningful than he had ever imagined. Though the girl was gone, her presence lingered in every action, every choice, and every moment of awareness. The cowboy's life had been forever altered, not by wealth, not by fame, not by grand gestures, but by the simple act of welcoming a stranger, listening to her stories, and allowing himself to see the world through eyes that were open, compassionate, and observant. And in that quiet, steady way, he carried forward her lessons, shaping not only his own life, but touching the lives of many who crossed his path. In the end, the cowboy realized a truth he would carry for the rest of his days, that sometimes one night, one small act, and one person's courage can change a life forever. And that realization made every lonely mile he had traveled, every hardship he had endured, and every quiet moment of reflection worthwhile. because through it all he had learned that life is richer when shared, stronger when guided by compassion, and more meaningful when one chooses to open the heart to unexpected lessons. The morning after the girl left, the cowboy woke to a quiet prairie. The wind whispered gently through the grass, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and wildflowers. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, and the air felt fresh, full of possibility. For the first time in many years, the cowboy did not feel the usual emptiness that came with the start of a new day. Instead, he felt a sense of clarity, a calm awareness that the past few days had changed something deep inside him. The girl's presence, though brief, had left a mark that would stay with him forever. He rose and walked outside, the wooden floor creaking beneath his boots. The carved bird she had left on the shelf seemed to catch the morning light, and he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He remembered her words. Even one night, one act of kindness, can change a life. At the time they had seemed simple, gentle words, but now their meaning was clear. That single night had already transformed him. It had reminded him of the importance of noticing the world, of caring for others, and of opening his heart to connection. He spent the morning tending to the cabin. He swept the floors, stacked firewood neatly, and repaired the small cracks in the walls that the storm had revealed. These small tasks, which once seemed mundane or unnecessary, now carried meaning. He realized that caring for a place, for the world around him, was a reflection of caring for himself and for others. Each movement was a lesson, echoing the girl's quiet guidance. It was as though she had planted seeds in his life, and now they were beginning to grow. As the day wore on, the cowboy thought about the people in the nearby villages. He realized he had long ignored the communities around him, seeing them as distant and separate from his own solitary life. But her words lingered in his mind. Change is possible if you choose it. He decided to act. He gathered some supplies, biscuits, dried meat, and tools, and set off toward the nearest village. Along the way, he noticed things he had never truly seen before. A child helping an elder carry water, a small garden blooming by a cabin, and the expressions of neighbors sharing smiles and greetings. He felt a connection to these people, one he had long denied himself, and it warmed him in a way he had never expected. In the village, he offered assistance where he could. He helped mend fences, guided travelers safely across rough terrain, and even offered advice to young cowhands learning the trade. People began to notice the change in him. He was still the strong, capable cowboy they had known, but now he seemed gentler, more thoughtful, more present. He smiled more easily, listened more carefully, and offered help without hesitation. The villagers spoke quietly of the man who had always been solitary but now seemed to carry a quiet wisdom, a calm confidence, and an unspoken kindness. Throughout the weeks, he reflected often on the girl who had changed his life. He imagined her traveling to new villages, helping people, and sharing her wisdom with others. He thought of the stories she had told about her village, about her people, and about the lessons of patience, courage, and observation. Each memory reminded him that life was more than surviving. It was about noticing the small details, offering help when possible, and connecting with others in meaningful ways. The cowboy also began to connect with his own family in small ways. He sent letters, offering assistance and sharing news of his life. He realized he had spent too long apart from those he cared for, allowing pride and distance to keep him isolated. The lessons from the girl had made him recognize that relationships, even strained or distant ones, were worth nurturing. Each letter he wrote, each word he chose, felt like a small step toward rebuilding bonds he had long neglected. Seasons changed as they always do, and the prairie shifted from the soft warmth of spring to the golden haze of summer. The cowboy's life had transformed quietly, but steadily. His cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a home filled with purpose, care, and attention. He tended a small garden, repaired structures, and welcomed travelers who needed rest or guidance. The carved bird she had left remained on the shelf, a daily reminder of the lessons she had taught and the transformation she had sparked. Every morning he glanced at it and felt the subtle strength it represented: hope, courage, and the quiet power of kindness. He also began keeping a small journal, something he had never done before. In it, he wrote about the days, the people he met, and the lessons he learned. He included observations of nature, reflections on conversations, and small acts of kindness he witnessed or performed. Through writing, he discovered a new way to process his thoughts and emotions, a way to remember and honor the wisdom the girl had shared. It became a practice of mindfulness and gratitude, something that enriched his life far beyond what he had imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the cowboy sat by his fire reflecting on the journey of the past days. He remembered the storm, the deer, the confrontation with the men, and the quiet moments of conversation and laughter. Each memory reminded him that transformation is not sudden but gradual. The girl had not performed miracles. She had simply shown him a perspective he had ignored, offered guidance he had never received, and inspired him to act differently. That was enough. That small encounter had changed everything. Over time, travelers began asking him to tell the story of the girl. He recounted the night she appeared at his cabin, the storm raging outside, and how he had offered her shelter. He spoke of her wisdom, her courage, and the way she had opened his eyes to the world beyond himself. People listened in awe, not just at the story, but at the lessons it carried. He would tell them that kindness, observation, and openness to others could change a life, sometimes in a single night, and he would emphasize that even small acts, when done with care and intention, had the power to ripple outward, touching many lives. The cowboy also began teaching others the lessons he had learned. He shared knowledge of the land, survival, and observation, but he also taught the importance of patience, empathy, and community. His life, once solitary and narrow, became a source of guidance and inspiration for those around him. People came to respect not just his skill as a cowboy, but the way he lived, with care, awareness, and quiet strength. And all of it traced back to the brief visit of a young girl who had asked only for shelter. Years passed. The prairie changed with the seasons, as it always would, and the cowboy grew older. Yet the lessons from that night remained ever present. The carved bird stayed on the shelf, its simple form a constant reminder of what mattered most: kindness, connection, and the courage to change. He often reflected on how a single encounter had reshaped the course of his life, and he felt gratitude every day for the unexpected gift she had brought. In the end, the cowboy realized a truth he had never fully understood before. Life is not about how far you travel, how much you endure, or how strong you become alone. Life is measured by the connections you make, the care you give, and the lessons you carry forward. The girl had shown him that even one night, one act of kindness, could have a lasting impact, not just on a single life, but on the world around it. He knew that her influence would continue through him, through the people he helped, and through the stories he told. As he sat by the fire one quiet evening, watching the stars appear above the prairie, he felt a profound sense of peace. He thought of the girl wherever she might be, continuing her journey, helping others, and sharing her quiet wisdom. He smiled softly, knowing that her visit had not only changed his life, but had inspired him to live in a way that honored her lessons. And in that realization, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. One born not of wealth, fame, or accomplishments, but of connection, awareness, and the knowledge that even small actions could shape the course of a life forever. The prairie stretched endlessly before him, and he felt part of it in a new way. He had learned to notice the details, to act with care, and to open his heart. He understood that the world was bigger, more connected, and more beautiful than he had ever realized. And in that understanding, he carried forward the most valuable lesson of all, that life is richest when shared, strongest when guided by compassion, and most meaningful when one is willing to embrace change. And so, the cowboy lived the rest of his days differently. He remained strong, skilled, and independent, but now he was also compassionate, observant, and connected.